I built my whole retirement plan around $1,300 a month. And I ran the numbers 3 separate times before I ever booked the flight to the Philippines. The thing that almost sank me wasn't rent, it wasn't food, it wasn't even the visa. It was a bill I never once put in my spreadsheet. And by the time I understood what it was doing to me, it had already eaten close to half of what I had left over every month. You want to know what it was. And more than that, you want to know how I fixed it in one weekend for less than the price of a plane ticket home. My name is Walt Bishop. I spent 31 years as an electrician in the Ohio Valley, running wire through factories and farmhouses and everything in between. When I retired, my Social Security check came out to $1,310 a month. Not a pension on top of it, not savings worth bragging about, just that one check, once a month, for the rest of my life. Every retirement calculator I plugged that number into back home told me the same thing. I could not retire in Ohio on $1,300. I could barely keep the lights on in Ohio on $1,300. And that is a strange thing for an electrician to admit out loud. So I did what a lot of folks in my position do. I started looking overseas. The Philippines kept coming up, video after video, forum after forum. Cheap rent, cheap food, warm water you can swim in every day of the year. I found a furnished one-bedroom in a town called Dumaguete on the island of Negros for $180 a month. I found a market 3 blocks away where a whole week of groceries, fish, rice, mangoes, greens ran me $40. I sat at my kitchen table back in Ohio and did the math, and I felt like a genius. Rent, $180, food, $160, phone and internet, $30. I had over $900 left over every single month, and I told my brother I was about to live better on $1,300 than I ever had on $4,000. I want you to remember that number, $900 left over. Because I am about to tell you exactly what happened to it, and it is not what you think. Quick word before I go further. The old methods my family uses, there is more of it than fits in any one video. I gathered the whole of it into a book you can buy in our pinned comment below. The book is the long version. If you want it, it is there. I will not mention it again. My first month in Dumaguete, I barely touched the air conditioner. It was March. Warm, sure, but I had ceiling fans, and I left the windows open, and I felt fine. My electric bill that month came to $11. I remember standing in the little office of the co-op that runs the power out here, holding that receipt, thinking I had this whole retirement thing figured out. Then April came, then May. The kind of heat that does not care how tough you think you are. The kind of heat where the inside of a concrete apartment gets hotter than the outside, because the walls hold on to it long after the sun goes down. I turned the air conditioner on, just at night, just to sleep. My bill that month was $91. The month after, with the heat climbing and me running the unit longer, it hit $147. I sat there with that receipt in my hand, doing the same math I had done back in Ohio, except now the answer was different. Rent, $180. Food, $160. Phone and internet, $30. Electric, $147. That is $517. Before I have paid 1 peso toward health insurance, before I have covered 1 peso of visa fees, before anything unexpected happens at all. My $900 of breathing room had shrunk to under $400, and it happened because of a bill I never once thought to research before I got on that plane. So here is the question I want you sitting with. If the number that almost broke your retirement budget is not the number every guide talks about, what else did those guides get wrong? Here is what nobody selling you the retirement dream tells you. Every single Philippines retirement guide, every video, every forum post leads with rent. Rent is the number that gets clicks, because rent is the number that shocks an American. $150 for an apartment sounds impossible if you are used to paying $1,500 back home, so that is the number everybody puts in the title. But rent is not where a fixed income retiree gets hurt. Rent is fixed. You sign a lease, you know the number, it does not move for a year. Electricity is not fixed. Electricity in the Philippines is some of the most expensive in all of Southeast Asia relative to what people earn here. More costly per kilowatt hour than a lot of American states, and that catches almost everyone off guard. Because everything else is so cheap, you just assume power will be cheap too. It is not. A big share of the country's power comes from imported fuel, and that cost gets passed straight down to your monthly bill. Add a tropical climate where your body is fighting to cool itself 14 hours a day, and you have got a bill that can double, even triple, depending on how many hours you run one single air conditioning unit. Here's the part that took me embarrassingly long to understand. And I say embarrassingly because I spent 31 years working with electricity for a living. The cost is not the temperature outside. The cost is the gap between the temperature outside and the temperature you are demanding inside. Every degree you push that unit to fight for costs you real money. And most retirees set their thermostat the way they did back home, 68, 70 degrees, without ever doing the math on what that gap costs in a place where the grid itself runs expensive. That is the counterintuitive truth sitting underneath this whole video. The number that sinks a fixed income retirement in the Philippines is not the sticker price everyone warns you about. It is the invisible number, the one that only shows up after you have already signed the lease and committed to the life. Rent is the headline. Power is the ambush. I started asking around, the way you do once a bill like that gets your attention. Turns out I was not alone. Down the hall from me, a Canadian named Pete, who retired on a pension close to mine, had the exact same story. Except his shock came from running 2 window units instead of 1, cooling his whole apartment instead of just the bedroom. His bill one month hit $210, more than his rent. At the market, a Filipina friend named Marisol, who has lived here her whole life, laughed when I told her my numbers. She said her own family runs fans 9 months out of the year and saves the aircon for the 3 worst weeks, because they grew up doing that math without a calculator. Meralco, the big utility that covers most of Metro Manila, charges some of the highest residential electric rates in the country, and even out here on Negros, running on a smaller cooperative grid. The rate per kilowatt hour still runs close to what you would pay hooked up in parts of California, in a country where the average local wage is a small fraction of an American one. That mismatch is the whole story. The wiring is not the problem. The pricing is not even really the problem. The problem is that Americans move here with an American relationship to air conditioning, expecting it to run cheap enough to leave on all day without thinking about it. And that assumption is the one thing in this whole move that does not survive contact with a real Philippine summer. So once I understood that, I stopped fighting the bill and I started fixing the actual problem. Here is what I changed, one piece at a time. And every single one of these you can do in a weekend. The first thing I did, I call it fixing the gap, not fighting the grid. Every degree you ask that unit to pull down costs money. So instead of setting my thermostat to 70, the way I did in Ohio, I set it to 78 and let the ceiling fan carry the rest of the load. A fan does not cool the room. It cools you by moving air across your skin. Combine a fan with a unit that only has to fight 10 degrees instead of 20, and you cut the compressor's workload by more than half. That one change alone dropped my bill from $147 down to around $90. The second thing costs money up front, but it pays itself back fast. I swapped my landlord's old air conditioning unit for an inverter model. Most of the units you find in older Philippine apartments are non-inverter, which means the compressor slams on full blast, shuts off, then slams back on full blast again all night long, like a light switch instead of a dimmer. An inverter unit ramps up hard once, then holds a steady, lower speed once the room is cool. I paid $420 for a small inverter split unit, and $35 more to have a local technician install it. That unit uses somewhere around 30 to 50% less electricity, doing the exact same job as the one it replaced. It paid for itself in about 7 months. Every month after that was pure savings, straight back into my pocket. The third thing I call the 2-hour rule. I do not run the air conditioning to fall asleep. I run it for the 2 hours before I go to bed, to pull the heat and the humidity out of the room, and then I switch it off and let the ceiling fan carry me through the rest of the night. Your body temperature drops on its own while you sleep anyway. You do not need a compressor fighting the outside heat at 3 in the morning when you are already unconscious and would never notice the difference between 72 degrees and 78. The fourth thing was picking the right spot in the building in the first place, which I got wrong the first time and would do differently now. I live on the 3rd floor these days instead of the ground floor, high enough to catch a real cross breeze, with windows on 2 sides of the unit instead of 1. Ground floor apartments in a lot of these buildings sit in dead air, boxed in by the building next door. And the tenants down there run their units twice as long, just to get the same relief I get up on 3, with half the effort and half the electricity. The fifth thing is the one that actually matters most, and it has nothing to do with the unit at all. I stopped treating electricity like a fixed cost the way I treated rent. I built what I call a power float into my monthly budget. $150 set aside every single month, whether I use all of it or not. On a cool month, I bank the leftover. On a brutal month in May or June, the float covers the whole spike, and I am never caught flat-footed the way I was that first hot season. That single change is the real difference between a fixed income retirement that survives the Philippines and one that gets wrecked by a single bad summer. It is the same trick every good electrician learns early. You do not size the wire for the average draw. You size it for the peak. And while I was rebuilding my budget from the ground up, I fixed the other blind spot at the same time, the one buried right next to the power bill. Medicare does not follow you overseas. Not $1 of it crosses the ocean. PhilHealth, the government program here, will cover you for a modest monthly premium, but it is built for everyday care, not a real emergency. I carry PhilHealth for the routine stuff, and I carry one catastrophic international policy stacked on top of it, the kind that only kicks in for a hospital stay or a surgery, which runs me under $50 a month at my age. That is the second number nobody puts in the title of their video, and it belongs in the same conversation as the electric bill, because both of them stay invisible right up until the day you actually need them. One more number caught me off guard though. This one is not monthly, it is a lump sum, and it is worth knowing before you ever book a flight. To stay here long-term the clean way, most retirees apply for the SRRV, the Special Resident Retirees Visa, through the Philippine Retirement Authority. If you can prove a lifetime pension of at least $800 a month, the required time deposit is $15,000, and it is refundable if you ever decide to leave for good. If you do not have a qualifying pension, that deposit climbs to $30,000. My Social Security counted as a qualifying pension, so I paid the lower deposit, plus a one-time application fee and a small annual fee to keep the visa active. That money never gets spent. It sits in a government-accredited bank account in your name, drawing a little interest of its own, and you get every dollar of it back if you ever go home. But nobody puts that lump sum in the title either, and showing up without a plan for it means scrambling through tourist visa extensions while you sort out paperwork you should have handled before you ever packed a bag. Here is the bigger picture, and it is the same lesson my grandfather taught me about wiring a house, long before I ever taught it to an apprentice of my own. You do not budget for the load you expect. You budget for the load the system can actually throw at you on its worst day. A retirement budget built only around rent and groceries is a house wired for the easy months. A retirement budget that accounts for the power float, the insurance premium, and the visa deposit is a house wired for the whole year, including the months that try to burn it down. I am not really living on $1,300 anymore, if I am honest with you. By the time you add in the float and the insurance, my real number runs closer to $1,100 a month, and I still bank a couple hundred most months on top of that. But that number only works because I found out the hard way what the real load looks like, instead of trusting the number in somebody else's video title. My brother asked me last month if I regretted it, now that the number is not as clean as the one I bragged about that first year. I told him no, and I meant it. The version of this move that almost failed was the version where I trusted a headline number I never tested against a real Philippine summer. The version that is working, the one I am living right now, is the version where I know exactly what a bad month costs before it arrives, instead of finding out the hard way with my back against the wall. That is the whole difference between a retirement that survives and one that quietly falls apart 6 months in, while the retiree is too embarrassed to post about it. You will meet plenty of people in expat groups online who swear they live on $900 a month here, and some of them might even be telling the truth for one particular month in one particular unit, with the fan on and the aircon off. What they are not telling you is what happens the month the heat does not let up, or the month somebody gets sick. I would rather you hear the honest number from me now than learn it from a bounced budget 6 months into your own move. Here is what I want you to do tonight, if you are seriously thinking about doing what I did. Do not build your budget around rent and food alone. Build it around 4 numbers: rent, food, a power float set at whatever the hottest month could realistically cost you, and one real health insurance policy that would actually cover a hospital stay if you needed one. Add those 4 together before you ever step on a plane. That is your real number, not the one that makes for a good headline. Tell me in the comments what your real number comes out to and where in the world you are looking at retiring. I read every single one of them. Next time, I am going to show you the 2-page form Almost every new retiree here fills out wrong. The one mistake that can freeze your entire visa deposit for months if nobody catches it before you submit it.